Hey guys, Jay here from Java Group Business Consulting, and here we are with another software development video. So today we're going to be focusing on project team roles. Who and what do they do? So I've spoken a lot about my other videos about different roles and everything like that, and this is a question that I get. Who do I need to have in my team? How many people do I need to have? What sort of skill sets do I need to have in there? I'm sorry, there isn't a cookie cutter approach. There's no one size fits all. It really depends on the project and also the maturity of your business, your team, and how everything comes together. But what we'll do today is we'll step through some roles at a high level, just to give a bit of an understanding and hopefully, I suppose, in terms enough that it'll paint a picture of what these roles are, what they do, and you might be able to work out whether you need to use them or not. So the roles that are vital, I suppose, or deemed as vital in this space, or you'll hear a lot about, I guess, are product owners, Scrum Masters, project managers, business analysts, designers, solution architects, developers, testers. There's a lot more, but these are the ones that we'll kind of cover off in this video. There are others that you want me to cover off or discuss or learn more about. Certainly leave a comment below, and then I can look at doing videos on them in the future. So I guess the product owner. So the product owner is, in my experience with the companies that I've worked with, is either non-existent or it's in its infancy. It's kind of an idea that everybody's aware of, but no one's really doing it terribly well. Being a certified product owner myself, it's interesting to see the way that different training companies roll it out. And then different companies look to bring it into their business. But basically, the product owner's role is to live and breathe the backlog and in my experience, the engagement with the sponsors or the key stakeholders. So they need to find items of value, bring them to the team, and then manage their priority with the backlog to ensure that the highest value items are always at the top of that backlog, and that everything else in that backlog is in a decreasing order of value and priority. Therefore, they're working with the sponsors, they're working with key stakeholders to identify new initiatives, new items of value, new value understandings or value propositions to be able to bring into existing pieces of work and keep that backlog fed, as well as looking at ensuring that items on that backlog where the value has been descoped or is no longer relevant are started to be either deprioritized or removed entirely out of the backlog so that they're not distracting. It needs to be transparent. Everybody needs to be able to see this backlog and see the work that the product owner is going through to ensure that everything can be swiftly delivered and that the team are effectively working to the right pieces of work. Nothing's more frustrating than having resources who are stuck doing work that isn't effective, that isn't useful. It's always it's critical that the product owner gets this balance right between where they're looking for value and finding value, and then bringing that into the project to be delivered as part of the team. The Scrum Master. So if you're running Kanban, if you're running a non-agile or a non-agile methodology, you won't typically need a Scrum Master. I've heard this role be given lots of other titles: squad leads, people leader, servant leader, all sorts of different things, but the role is effectively the same. Their role is to protect the team and ensure that the Scrum processes is clearly articulated to everybody involved, both within the team and outside of the team. I need to make sure that tools are set up correctly, that the team have everything that they require to be able to do their job, and that they're shielded from that outside world, that the product owner is not going to them, that stakeholders and sponsors aren't going to that execution team or that Scrum team directly. They are not involved in the decisions of value. That's back on the product owner, but they need to be aware of the priorities and at what state the backlog is in to ensure that they can keep bringing work into the Scrum and that everybody's free to execute their work. No one's being blocked. Everything's ready to go when the team look to pick it up, and they're not having to be chop and change or move up and down that prioritized backlog because the items at the top haven't been looked after or aren't ready to be done. So they've got to make sure that everything works well, and this means that it's quite a tight relationship between the Scrum Master and the product owner to ensure that all of that high value work is ready to go and it's being executed and delivered on by the team, and that those next pieces of value are being understood, and that any of the questions that are coming at the team are being blocked off and then pushed back onto either the Scrum Master to answer or onto the product owner. Project manager. This is an interesting one. I've had discussions with people more recently where they said, oh, we run full Agile, we run Scrum, we've got Scrum Masters, we don't need project managers. I've also then been involved in organizations who have been running Agile and Scrum and things like that and still had project managers involved. At the end of the day, the responsibilities of the project manager are to ensure that everything is undertaken as required, ensure that there's a high level of performance, a high level of quality, and exceptional delivery, to ensure that there's a coordinated approach and that there's a good North Star and that everything is working in the way that it should, that the outcomes are surrounded by good governance and collateral, and that everyone is aware at any point where that project is up to. So project budgets are maintained, time carding, time sheeting, resource swapping in and out of, upskilling, coordination with other managers to move people in and out of teams or to bring new resources on. That really needs to be managed. That traditional project manager, PMO, governance, awareness space still exists regardless of what methodology you need. Someone needs to be looking after that. Typically, I've found that the best person to do that, or the person most deftly able to do that, is the project manager. They can do those status reports. They can take care of all the R&D documentation and all of the compiling of that, making sure that everything is being documented and kept up to date, making sure that there is the governance, making sure that there is interdependency awareness and meetings with other teams or organizations, ensuring that while the Scrum Master is blocking the team, the project manager is ensuring that the work gets done and ensuring it gets done in accordance with exactly how it's supposed to get done. So I still see it as a very valuable role. There's still a lot of tasks in there that need to be done. However, obviously, other people do have different perceptions based on their own biases. So it's certainly an interesting component and be very interested to know your thoughts too. Business analyst. So I think the BA's role is really, really important. I certainly feel it. I mean, I was a BA myself for quite a while, so maybe I'm a little bit biased towards it, but it's the BA who works with the product owner and works with the developer to really define the detail in the tickets and ensure that all the requirements are there, that the user stories are fleshed out, the designer's got all of the context and understands exactly what's going on, that the ticket and the testing plan, that the testers are aware of how they'll plan it, that the solution architects and the developers are aware of how they'll design it and how they'll code it. They're really putting all of the information into the ticket to ensure the success that's around. I've seen this role be dropped from project teams before, and it's never been great. Asking a designer, and these roles can do it, but asking a designer who just wants to be focused on the UI and the UX and how people are going to interact with the system and how it's going to flow, to then have to go and document all of the requirements and the expectations and the ACs and the implementation plan for the designs can be done, but it's fairly counterintuitive. That designer should be freed up to be able to just keep designing, just be able to keep coming up with the flow, keep coming up with the UI and the toolkit surrounding it, ensuring that it's all there. Likewise, asking a developer or a solution architect to document all those requirements and stuff and outlining their implementation plans and their acceptance criteria and those sorts of things are equally important. and can be done. The same with the product owner in terms of well, what are the acceptance criteria around value? What are the user stories trying to tell us in this space? It can be done, but it's often piecemeal. It often gets rushed, and it's often done not very well, or it's disjointed in terms of its delivery. Having a highly skilled business analyst can really make a huge difference on the project, because it is one common voice who's sitting there and saying, right, how are we going to tie all of this together? How am I going to tie the information I'm getting from the product owner and the solution architects and the functional consultants and the development team and the designers and the testers? How I'm going to tie all of that together into a ticket that has all of this information encompassed, so that regardless of who picks it up, they know exactly what the expectations are, exactly what needs to be delivered, and exactly what the outcome at the end of the day is and how they get there. These guys are worth, in my opinion, again, and like I said, I'm probably biased, they're worth their weight in gold. It's a very difficult skill set, but it's a very important skill set to have on any team. And it can change dramatically the quality of the work and the speed at which the team are going to work at based on how good they are in terms of defining their stories and the role. The designer, so we touched on that with the business analyst, but the designer just looks after the creation, testing, and presentation of the user interface. So not testing in the sense of going through each and every screen and making sure the developers have completed it correctly. There should be a design review where the designer goes through and makes sure that their designs have been delivered on, and has that ability to mentally retrospect on what they've done and how that can drive their design into the future. But it's more the testing of the customer base. So there's a lot of terms around UI and UX and what is that, and we'll talk about that in a separate video. But the user experience is where that testing can happen. So designers will often look at analytics, they'll look at user information, they'll look at the personas and the creation of those, target audience, key audiences, those sorts of stuff. Sometimes they do user interviews as well, to see how people find or what people prefer. So what your customer base prefers, or how best to target their needs and their use. There's a lot of different thought patterns around this, but a talk that I was at a little while ago spoke about trauma-centered design, and there was a designer there talking about the fact that normally they'll design they've historically designed interfaces that were mobile for people who were either using online banking or were traveling on public transport and those sorts of things. So just the general public, day-to-day, average life. They then had to work with a not-for-profit organization who dealt with people who had gone through significant life events and were mentally impacted in a negative way around these. I won't go into detail as to who it was or what exactly they were trying, who exactly they were trying to work with, or what they were trying to deliver. But these people had significant life events, which would potentially have them interacting with the application in an extremely high stress and dangerous environment, or in a distressed state after the fact. This led them down a path of understanding trauma-centered design, where they looked to design something based on that exact person and how they would be thinking and feeling, and what could work for them to keep them safe, to calm them down, and to be able to provide them the support, assistance, and help that they so desperately required. Now, while you don't have to focus on the trauma-centered aspect of it or not, the point of what I found really interesting from that was that this designer, rather than just sort of looking at it and thinking, okay, well, I'm dealing with mums or dads, or I'm dealing with the young or the elderly, they really sat down and dove into how is my user going to be mentally, and what's their thought pattern going to be like, how comfortable are they going to be feeling, how safe are they feeling, and then that transpired into exactly how they design the application to be able to flow through in a calm manner in that way. But equally, the feedback around it. So, do you allow pop-up notifications? Do you text message or email people back? Those sorts of decisions were then again made based on the type of user that was going to be engaging with the platform and whether that would make them more distressed or put them in a more vulnerable position by utilizing the application. So a good designer is, and a designer being able to use their tools effectively to deliver on the company vision is really effective. What's also important for the designer in this role, though, is to work closely with the product owner and understand the value proposition and what the boundaries are. So often a business will want to do things in a certain way because they have to. So maybe it's regulatory, maybe it's a compliance, audit and compliance thing, maybe it's a risk thing. So the designer going off and designing something that is completely in contradiction to that is useless. So they need to look at those value propositions, look at those limitations and requirements around the business, and then be able to design the best for that interaction with that user in that system. They traditionally work ahead of the team, same with the business analyst, and the business analyst and the designer often, in my experience, have worked hand in hand together to be able to craft exactly what the piece of work is going to look like, and ensuring that it's detailed enough and clearly articulated so that when it gets handed over to the execution team, it can just be done. Solution architects. There's enterprise architects. There's lots of different words. Probably architect is the term that I should have done. These people design and develop the technical approach at a broad or a broader than project by project or team by team approach. They set the North Star around what technologies can we and can't we use, how can we interact with them, what are they going to be, and how should they be structured for the best execution, but then maintainability beyond that. And they generally look over the business as a whole. So I mentioned in one of the other videos the other day that it might be something like you use an enterprise solution like an SAP or a JDE or something like that. So your solution needs to be architected within that. Very rarely will where you're using one of these types of systems, will they say, okay, go off and build a completely separate database on your own. Often these people also are aware of the penetration testing efforts and the vulnerabilities and the risks associated with different things, or the fastest way to be able to interact with the data that's already existing and the tables that are already existing. So they can really define what you are and aren't able to use and how best to be able to execute on those to be able to get that goal. They usually work fairly closely with the development team to twofold, them and the business analyst and the designer, to ensure that the information is going to flow through correctly in a way that's going to make sense, and that the developers understand exactly what it is that they're allowed to deliver, and with inside what programming languages, structures, frameworks, etc., that they're able to do so. The developer. So these guys have lots of different terms. I use developer very broadly. I've heard them referred to as engineers and so forth before. These guys are the guys who write the lines of code in its simplest sense. They're the ones that ensure that the design that the designer has provided you actually works, that the data is saved in a database, that it's all done so securely, that the right security levels and roles are assigned, that thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code all come together to be able to form this seamless experience, and that it's done so in a way that is measurable and in accordance with the requirements to meet the user stories and the acceptance criteria. Obviously, nothing gets done in a digital world. Nothing gets done without a developer. Nothing gets done without writing lines of code. There are, and we'll get into this later, ways to pick development houses and to pick certain technologies which maybe lessen your reliance or dependency or cost around developers. and certain skill sets to look at and others to avoid, and we can talk about that in another video. But these guys are obviously vital, and they're one of the key components of the execution team, obviously. Testers, so they test, but it's not as simple as that. So there are so many different forms of testing to be done. There are unit tests, which are done ticket by ticket. There's scenario testing, which is running through whole scenarios and customer experience situations to be able to do it. There's user acceptance testing, where you generally go out and ask a third party to get involved and have a look at things. And sometimes that involves a designer, especially if it's design testing. There's penetration testing, which is you, in its simplest form, you pay a hacker or somebody to try and exploit vulnerabilities in your system to see how strong or how vulnerable it is. There are so many other forms of testing, but what's vitally important is that you test and you test well. Every ticket should be tested. Does it meet its acceptance criteria? Every common scenario should be done. Things should be tested both in the developer's development environment, in your staging and testing in environments, and also in your production environment. It's really important that this testing rolls on, and we can also in a future video talk about ways to be able to lessen that burden on the testers, so that you don't have to have a suite of 500 testers, or to test every component that you complete. It takes days worth of testing effort to do. There are smarter and sophisticated ways where you can coordinate your approaches around that and lessen your burden on the human element of testing, to ensure that the testers that you do have on your team, they're being used in the most useful and highly effective ways possible, as opposed to constantly maintaining repeatable and repeatedly executing the same tests over and over and over again. So in a nutshell, if you have all of those roles, you should have a better understanding, I guess, in terms of what they all take and how they would all interact together to be able to form it. Now, one thing that I will mention is that you can have people covering multiple roles. Depending on the size of the project, and obviously the bigger the project, the bigger the company, you're probably going to want to split them out into their own. But for smaller projects and smaller businesses, you can certainly cover multiple roles at once. It's not uncommon for some of the businesses that I've gone into to see the product owner, Scrum Master, and project manager is exactly the same person, or to see that the devs are testing their own code. So not only are they developing it, but they're also implementing the tests. And then the product owner is coming behind as the key user acceptance tester and ensuring that everything's being ticked off and is in accordance with what they would expect the customer to interact with, what their intended value proposition was up front, and the imagination of their designs in that initial phase. So there can be blending of roles, an adjustment of roles, but I hope this has been informative. If you've liked it, give me a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions, comments, or ideas on other content, please leave a comment down below. Otherwise, until next time, keep innovating.